at the dry mouth of Birch Creek, Lemhi Range, Idaho. We're going to look for pioneers today and follow the creek that permitted them to settle here. William Tyler and his wife Laura Buckland Tyler were early pioneers in the area that we will be exploring today at the lower end of Birch Creek. The peak overlooking the area that we'll be exploring is Tyler Peak, elevation 10,740 feet on the crest of the Lemhi Range. Ace Bartell and the Kyles horse ranchers from Howe, Idaho would have passed this way in the 1880s. Pronghorns are so fast. Anyway, the pioneers would have come along this road on their stages and on horseback. This is the most direct approach to the creek itself, which is dry now but would have flowed past that area called the Cottonwoods. At this point in the journey, the horses and cattle would need no coaxing. They would be stampeding for the water of Birch Creek. At the Cottonwoods of Lower Birch Creek, Mount Hoop's in the background. It's believed that the Ballards and the Goddards were the homesteading families that tried to settle this land in the 1880s. The Ballards ran a stage station that serviced the mining interests in Nicolia, Salmon, Idaho. They had a mail route. We know the name Ballard because there's a pioneer cemetery that we'll be visiting shortly. Characteristic of all of the streams that sink into the desert of the Snake River Plain is a braided gravelly channel, which we have here. Perhaps you wonder how such a massive alluvial fan could form with such little water flow. We need to remember back 10,000, 100,000 years ago in geological time. The area that we are in was glaciated. An example of that would be the remnant of a small alpine glacier on the side of Saddle Mountain. The area you're looking at would have been glaciated, carved out by a glacier. Birch Creek gets its name from the clump birch that grows on the banks of the channel. The stream is dry for both natural and man-made reasons. The porosity of the limestone alluvium really doesn't permit the stream to flow too far on its own. And in addition, the water has been diverted further upstream. In one of Idaho's most scenic areas, we have the pioneer Goddard Cemetery. overshadowed by the majestic Lemhi Range, Idaho's second highest mountain chain. One is by the name of Richards. Don't have the first name on that. We came from the cottonwoods right over there, and directly behind the cottonwoods is a little rhyolite hump of land, and that's called Richards Butte. Rosetta Goddard. Sweet child, died at age 13. Baby born the same year that President Dwight D. Eisenhower was born, 1890. Samuel Goddard Jr., a teenager. And by pioneer standards, Sarah Brown Ballard, 1825 to 1895, lived to a ripe old age of 70 years. So at this point, we'd like to pay tribute to Grandma Sarah Ballard by naming a mountain summit for her. We will proceed over to that 7,415 foot spur of the Lemhi Range, and we'd like to name that commemoratively Grandma Sarah. Amidst the prickly pear and the sagebrush, it's a hard life out here in Birch Creek. So we pay tribute to the first pioneers that settled the area. It must have been a hard life for the Native Americans also, especially when the white settlers came and the game disappeared. Here we see northern Shoshone distinctive markings on the rocks made by hunters. Symbolism to show that game was taken in the area. The positioning of the dead sagebrush could indicate perhaps that this was a food cache also. For 10,000 years, man has been in this valley. This was a hunting area. No one tribe called it home. And even today, this is under federal ownership, Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Forest Service. I don't wish to leave you the impression that all was hardtack here in Birch Creek. There were fun moments too. There still are. Nor do I wish to leave you the impression that the desert here is all sagebrush. There's enough wheatgrass and fescue and other forage so that game can proliferate. In fact, the pioneers found out early on that this was wonderful horse grazing territory. Very soon, big cattle outfits grew. The dominant one in this area was the wood livestock. Denning and Clark was another big outfit in the 1800s. By the way, most of the historical information that we will have for you today has been provided by historian Judge William Steibel Petit, who has done some wonderful history of this section of Idaho. As we look ahead to our destination, we see that Grandma Sarah's still has a snowy side. While on the subject of history, let's talk about some of the historical aspects of the peaks that are right in front of us. Saddle Mountain was probably first called Needle Peak and we believe the first recorded ascent is by Vernon Bailey, who was with the 1890 Biological Reconnaissance of South Central Idaho with Dr. C. Hart Merriam. He found horn coral on the top. Great Western Peak at elevation 10,358 feet, so named for the mine that sits on the other side of it. In May 1991, the first ski descent of that mountain was made on the other side. Mount Hoops, elevation 10,728 feet, named for Clint Hoops, first climbed October 15th, 1989, just a couple of days after Hoops' death. Hoops was a former chairman of the State Board of Education of Idaho, prominent rancher and irrigator in the Teutonia area. We've already told you about William Tyler and his peak. Suffice it to say, the United States Geological Survey quadrangle of this whole area is called the Tyler Peak Quad. Dated 1969, this was one of the last areas to be topographically mapped. The mountain range really doesn't have foothills. It rises abruptly out of the plain, and as it rises, the first tree you'll encounter is mahogany. Mahogany is a very dry tree, and quite often the Forest Service will conduct controlled burns of the mahogany to prevent the spread of larger wildfires. In fact, there was a wildfire in that area right in there. Okay, let's head on over to Grandma Sarah's. We have to skirt Deer Canyon here. Most of the high alpine glaciers have these outwash valleys at their feet. So you can see from the depression in there that a good amount of water must have passed this way and contributed to the massive alluvial fan as the Birch Creek opens out into the Snake River Plain. We are looking towards Idaho Falls, by the way, which would be about 50 miles distant. At the mouth of Cedar Canyon, we'll head up canyon to approach the dry side of Grandma Sarah's. This is spring hiking at its very best today. Amidst the juniper, we will hike along the ridge to the top of our little mountain. Look, do you see the Indian markings on that rock outcrop? In this case, what our Shoshone or Bannock hunters would have been after were the birds and their eggs that nested. Let's do a little seasonal contrast for you here. In the desert ranges of Idaho, we have dry on the south-facing slopes towards our peak. But look what you have on the north-facing slopes. Still a vestige of winter. I believe that's a flax. Isn't that nice how they're turning green already? It wasn't possible to avoid winter entirely. The views opening up are awesome. There's my ski mountain, Great Western. Grow, little limber pine. And at the top of Grandma Sarah's, looks like someone has just made themselves at home. We have mahogany, Douglas fir, limber pine, and desert. A real interposition of life zones. Looking out into the Snake River Plain, the Idaho National Engineering Laboratory, East Butte and Middle Butte, and the southern spine of the Lemhi Range sinks into the desert. The summit that we're on, 7,415 feet, is just totally dwarfed by the 10,810-foot Saddle Mountain. But the peak we are on qualifies as a separate mountain. There is more than a 300-foot drop on all sides. The peak does stand alone. Great Western Mount Hope's looking north. That would be Bald Mountain and the upper Birch Creek Valley. The Birch Creek Valley, of course, looks so featureless from a distance at a high elevation, but the Goddard Cemetery, where Sarah Brown Ballard is buried, would be right in that direction towards the center of the valley. Here's what we have to say about the peak. Grandma Sarah's elevation, 7,415 feet Lemhi Range. This lovely outlier peak of the Lemhi Range is named for Sarah Ballard, 1825 to 1895. She and her kin, seeking a better life in America, pioneered this lower Birch Creek country in the 1880s. The Ballard family moved on to California, but Grandma Sarah stayed. She rests in peace in the Goddard Cemetery at the base of the mountain. Kyrie eleison. Rick Bogger, Idaho Falls, Idaho, March 14, 1992. We have built the cairn and left the message. And now we'll head back down to the creek. We have about a 1,500-foot vertical descent, and we've chosen to do a circular route. We'll go down to that low point and then Cedar Canyon. Will take us back to the motorcycle. This is just a wonderful up-close and personal view of Saddle Mountain with the South Stirrup and the North Stirrup. Down in the floor of Cedar Canyon, we see a small arch in the limestone rock. Neat thing about hiking in the Lemhi is every time you go out, you can learn and find something new. And even though I'm not the discoverer of this arch, I would like to suggest a name, the Tutankhamun Arch, because that rock structure would look like an Egyptian pharaoh. What do you think? Undoubtedly an Indian hunter's campsite, occupies the mouth of Cedar Canyon. With a solution cavity in the limestone. And a good view out into the Snake River Plain. We found the birches but not the creek. Let's go see if we can find some running water. Traveling upstream a couple of miles, still no water. Just dry cobble. Up until about 10 years ago, water would have flowed here year-round. The Reno ditch, actually dug by William Tyler, would head over to Reno Point, and that was a diversion that was dug by Tyler around 1882. He was the first to use irrigation in the area. And at this point there are some cattle holding pens. With the current diversion being a bit upstream yet. The current water right is held by a man named Sorensen from Idaho Falls, and he has constructed the levee here, and you see that that has caused ice jams to form. The water would be flowing over there. The landscape has been significantly altered by this project, which occurred 10 years ago. The water shortly after here goes in a pipe and then goes over a spur of the Beaverhead Range and down by Reno Point. The purpose was to sell water to the farmers in the Montague area. However, at this point the water is diverted past there and heads out towards Test Area North and the INEL. Apparently it's more lucrative to have the water go out there. For whatever reason, we don't know. And because it is so lucrative to sell the water, there's concern about seepage and loss of stream flow. So a few years back they put in some plastic sheeting, and that actually caused more water to be lost. So now at issue is whether the current owner can pour bentonite, which is a porous clay, into the bed of the creek. He'd have to bring bulldozers in here and dump the bentonite, and at issue as to whether that would kill all the fish and cause a sterile stream. You can see this is a lovely desert stream. The trick is to use the resource wisely and be a good steward of the land. It's claimed by some that when the bentonite is poured in here, it would fill up all of these crevices to minimize the seepage, but at the same time it would close off the habitat for insects. No insects, no fish. No fish, no life. And you can see how the creek has been altered with riprap and dikes. Generally not an eyesore in an urban environment. But this is such pristine wild land that it does become an issue. Birch Creek, and in the background the state's fourth highest mountain, Diamond Peak, forms an awesome backdrop in this basin and range province of Idaho.